tends to throw off, I believe, any sort of measuring of time like this is the flood. And the pre-flood world, because the pre-flood world, there was no rain, there was this covering, this envelope. That's going to affect things. And then, of course, the flood is the way that covered up rock and moved rock and affected the animals, etc. So, you know, we accept the truth of a global worldwide flood that covered all of the mountains. And if
it mixed up the deposits that are there with the animals that are there, it mixed it up. It's not, that idea is the uniformitarian view, where everything's been going on the same way all the way back, and all we have to do is look at that and we find what truth is. Rather, I think the people that are biblical believers would fall into catastrophism.
Correct.
We believe there's been events that really shook things up. And we just saw one in LA. That shook things up. Now, that's not global, but when you consider a global flood, which we're quite sure that the Bible describes a global flood. It says it's 19 cubits above the highest mountain. But that would shake things up. That would make it so the things that you expect to find have not been consistent. There's been an event that really damaged things completely. Water shooting up from below, depositing things that they're not expecting to deposit. And the fact that there's carbon-14, there's carbon-14 in the oil, carbon deposits. There's carbon-14 in oil deposits. There's carbon-14 in diamonds. And diamonds are supposed to be millions or billions of years old.
Dinosaurs.
Fossils have found carbon-14 in them. Those are things that should not be there. Carbon-14, some people say as long as a million years. I don't even think that many people think it's not even 50,000.
Yeah, I've heard 100,000.
100,000.
But way before dinosaurs.
Way before dinosaurs. So those dinosaurs should not have any carbon-14 left.
And I should say that way before dinosaurs, including to the uniformitarianism secular view.
Yeah.
Not according to scientists who have a creationist worldview.
Right.
And that really gets into when we start looking at this James Webb thing, or any science, you know, the data is the data.
Yeah.
The thing that needs to be made clear if we're explaining something to someone who wants to understand science and the Bible, the scientists who are Christians or creationists, they're not throwing out the science. Rather, they're looking at the same scientific data and coming to different conclusions based upon a worldview. And what is fascinating to me is that secular science has to ignore so much. For example, if you go on to the National Park Service website, they even talk about the fact that the rock layers do not correspond with this uniformitarian viewpoint. And their thing is, well, it's like ripping pages out of a diary. We can't explain it. No, what you're doing is you're data ignoring, okay? Or that petrified wood could occur over millions of years when we all know in common knowledge that when a tree falls, it decays.
It decays.
Versus if you've got a creationist viewpoint, you understand that when the earth opened up for the flood, you've got a bunch of hydrochloric acid coming out with minerals, and it shock mineralized the trees. And in fact, I found a study where people in the lab were able to shock metamorphize like a plant material, a tree material, and instantaneously mineralize it. That's a lot more of a rational, scientific explanation for the petrified forest in Holbrook, okay, than these trees fell down in place. Go out there and look. They're where they fell. And supposedly they didn't move for hundreds of millions of years. They didn't decay.
Right.
I mean, that's just pure folly.
And then they call them the trees that are standing straight up in the fossil record, going through millions of years of deterioration, and this tree never deteriorated, standing straight up in the different layers. I can't remember what they call that, but that's basically what the explanation is. And this tree, they say that this tree is standing there all this time. Never fell over, never rotted, never did any of those things. Along with the layers that they have in the Grand Canyon, you don't see any deterioration in the layers. They're perfect layers. They're straight lines. There's no deterioration in them. And supposedly there was no geographic changes, rivers flowing, nothing through these layers. And they're not there. The simple layers aren't there. They're stacked. And they're perfectly horizontal with lines on them. Now, you can come up with whatever excuse you want, but it seems to me that those are laid down by water. And the different layers are because the water came in, deposited something, drew back out, came back in, deposited more, and they're just sifting down and sitting on straight layers.
Yeah, back to your catastrophism, right? That it catastrophically, a bunch of silt and everything came in there and buried a tree that was upright.
Yeah.
That's way more logical
Yeah.
than a tree could stand in there and take successive layers
And still stand.
and still stand.
Yeah. That's a darn strong tree.
Right.
Standing up through those floods.
So